Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Gabriel Brodbar. I'm the Executive Director of the NYU Reynolds Program in Social Entrepreneurship, and I'm so glad you have chosen to spend your afternoon for today's conversation, Lessons from the World's Classrooms. Our guest, Wendy Kopp, really needs little introduction. She is, of course, founder and chair of Teach for America, and most recently co-founded the global movement Teach for All and serves as the organization's CEO. She has been a huge friend to the NYU Reynolds program in social entrepreneurship, having spoken at our kickoff dinner in 2006 as part of this speaker series in 2007, and of course again here this afternoon. On a more personal note, and I'm reminded of the old Hair Club for Men commercial where Cy Sperling says, "I'm not only the president, but I'm also a client." That was a joke. Thank you. Well, I'm not only introducing the former president of TFA, but I'm also a very proud alum. I joined TFA in 1991 when I did have quite a bit of hair, and I taught for 3 years at an alternative high school in Houston, Texas. It was an absolutely transformative life experience that had a pivotal role in shaping what my understanding of social change is really all about, and really served as the foundation on which my entire change-making trajectory has been built. Now multiply that by 28,000 other alumni and 10,000 new and returning teachers in classrooms all across the US right now, and you can maybe begin to get a sense of the extraordinary impact that TFA is having not only on hundreds of thousands of public school students, but on a growing army, about 30,000 strong today, of lifelong advocates for social change. It's really extraordinary to bear witness to the impact of something that started as an undergraduate thesis about 23 years ago. I know it's going to be a really interesting talk. I do hope many of you choose to participate. If you tweet, please use hashtag NYUSocent and at NYU Reynolds. I also encourage you to participate in the Q&A session that's going to follow the presentation. So without further ado, please join me in warmly welcoming back to NYU Reynolds a true social entrepreneur and a real leader, Wendy Kopp.
Thank you, Gabe. Well, thank you so much, Gabe, for your ambassadorship as an alum of Teach for America, and for setting us up here today. I'm so excited about all the efforts to advance social entrepreneurship. I think if there's one most salient lesson of my work and from all of the social enterprises over the last couple of decades, it's that we can actually solve these problems that at the surface can seem so entrenched, and that the key to solving them is essentially leadership. And I'll say more about that, but we need a lot more social entrepreneurship and a lot more of our most talented leaders just deciding to channel their energy against these problems and approach them with a sense of possibility. And I just know that if we can inspire more of that, more social entrepreneurship in a sense, that we will make our world a much better place. So really excited to just engage in a discussion with you all. How many of you are undergrads, actually, or okay, and just to get a sense of the room. You know, it seems like yesterday, honestly, when I was sitting in your seats. I guess you all probably view me as, old and wise at this point, but I still feel like it was yesterday that I was sitting in your seats with this kind of obsession about this idea that ultimately took me on the journey and through the kind of learning curves that I'm going to describe in a bit. Our generation, this was 1989 when I was a graduating senior at Princeton, and our generation at the time was known as the me generation. Supposedly we just all wanted to go make a lot of money and work on Wall Street. And I was just convinced that that label was wrong. Everywhere I looked, I myself was just searching for a way to make a real difference in the world. And I felt like I wasn't alone. Everyone I knew was searching for the same thing. And I had become very focused on this issue of educational inequity, just on the sort of extraordinary reality that our country considers itself to be a land of equal opportunity, and yet, even then and still today, where kids are born does more to predict your outcomes in our country than in any other advanced country. And I'd had various personal kind of encounters with that reality, which ultimately led me to this idea. I felt like not only was the problem wasn't the generation, but it was really the recruiters. So back in 1989, there were only a couple of types of recruiters banging down our doors if you're a liberal arts graduate like myself. And they were essentially investment banks and management consulting firms and a few brand management firms asking us to commit just 2 years to work in their firms. And they knew that would take care of everything else. 2 years, and they would cultivate those folks and go on. They would be their future leaders. And this is what led me to this idea. Why don't we go out and recruit people as aggressively to commit their first 2 years out of college to teach in our highest poverty communities. I thought it would make a real difference in the lives of kids in those classrooms, and at the same time, that experience would shape everything, the priorities, the career trajectories of a whole generation of leaders, and had this idea that was going to change our country, to have our future leaders' first experience be working with kids in our most under-resourced urban and rural communities, rather than working on Wall Street. So that was, my idealistic notion. Thank heaven for the incredible advantage of inexperience. I had no idea why that didn't make sense, what all the challenges would be to in fact, try to recruit thousands of folks to do this, and hundreds of them in the first year alone. So I dove in, and the idea was very quickly far beyond me. I could not have imagined where it took me and us. I don't think anyone would have predicted that, we'd have 57,000 applications this year, from, hundreds and hundreds of schools, but really representing not only many of our recent grads, but many of the most highly sought after among them. As you heard, we couldn't have envisioned that we would be, substantially bigger even than the Peace Corps, which at the time, seemed to be somewhat of a model for what we were working to do, with 10,000 teachers across 46 of our most underserved urban and rural regions. No one would have believed that 2/3 of the alumni of Teach for America would never leave the field of education, and that another 20% above that would have jobs that relate directly to schools or low-income communities, maybe from policy or law or, public health and such. And I certainly, in a million years, would not have envisioned that somehow this would take me, outside of this country. I started meeting very inspiring, just determined social entrepreneurs about maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, from very diverse places all around the world, initially from India, from Chile, but soon to be many other countries after that, who were just determined for one reason or another to launch this model in their countries. So to call on Chile's most outstanding recent grads and get them to commit 2 years to teach in their highest poverty communities, and then to go cultivate their leadership as an ongoing force for change. And it was their requests for help that ultimately sparked the development of the global Teach for All network. So I thought I would spend just a few minutes sharing with you the most salient lessons of this work over the last now, I guess, 24 years here in the United States, but also looking globally. And then thought we could just have a conversation on whatever you would like. So I said a bit about what led me to initially launch Teach for America. And what you probably know is that in our country, as I said before, where kids are born really determines their educational outcomes and in turn life outcomes. We have about 1/5 of our kids in this country, 16% of our kids are living below the poverty line, and already by the time they're in 4th grade, they're 3 years behind. Half of them will not graduate from high school. The half who walk across the graduation stage, so the half of our low-income kids who do get a high school degree, have an 8th grade skill level. So if you happen to be born into a family in the top quartile of family income, 80%, 80% likelihood you'll get a college degree. 8% for our bottom quartile kids. So our country is looking at, an opportunity gap that is simply enormous. And what I've discovered is that this is the case all around the world. All over the world, socioeconomic background predicts educational outcomes. The statistics it's almost eerie how similar they are. Many people, I'll meet folks who say, China, really? And, does China have that kind of an opportunity gap? Maybe you all know that it does. But the fact is, if you're living in an urban area in China, as 40 million of the Chinese kids do, 80% likelihood to get through college. But if you're living in a rural community in China, as 220 million Chinese kids do, 3% of you will get through college. In India, I hear so much talk, as we all do, about, because in fact India is huge and there are many incredibly well-educated folks who come out of India. But I just wonder every time I hear people talking about India and the wonders of its education system, whether people realize that 57% of the kids in India will not get through primary school and that 90% don't get through high school. So the folks people think about when they think about the incredibly well-educated kids in India, they're talking about 3 or 4% of the population. In Latin America, the kids who are born below the poverty line have, depending on the country, between they're 5 or 7 years fewer educational years than kids in high-income communities. So the bottom line is that all over the world, certainly in the least developed countries, but even in very unlikely places in Europe where you consider there to be strong social safety nets, there are incredible achievement gaps. In the UK, 16% of the low-income kids will actually get a university degree versus 96% of the kids who have the resources to go to private school in their primary and secondary years. So, just by way of overview, and I said a bit about this earlier, but the Teach for All partners first go out among their recent grads on their college campuses and among folks who are, a few years out of school and call upon individuals who have real leadership capability to join these programs. They invest in their development, as does Teach for America, in pursuit, and this is such hard work, but in pursuit of transformational change. We're all across the Teach for All network working to develop teachers who will in fact put their kids on a different trajectory, meaning on a trajectory to having more opportunities in life than they would otherwise have. It's incredibly hard work. Each of these programs is on its journey around how do you actually train and support teachers who, even in their first and second years can attain that kind of impact. But we think and know that that's crucial for the kids in our classrooms today and also for the lessons that those teachers will learn in the process of actually succeeding with their kids. We know that teaching successfully in high-need contexts is absolutely foundational for then a lifetime of leadership and advocacy for the fundamental changes that we're working to effect. And I'll say a bit more about this later, but I think many people here Teach for America or Teach for India or any of the number of Teach for All programs, and they think this is about 2 years of teaching. It's not about 2 years of teaching. That is strategy, just as it is for those, investment banks. We ask people to commit 2 years, but we know that it is about every year thereafter. It is about the 2 years for the kids in their classrooms, but it is about what this does to ultimately shape a leadership force of folks who will work at every level of the education system, every level of policy, and across sectors to affect the systemic changes that are actually necessary. And the idea is that these folks will work in collaboration with many others in their countries to affect those changes. This just shows you where Teach for All is now. It's only 5 years old. Teach for All is responsive to the initiative of local entrepreneurs. That's why we're not yet in Africa, meaning we didn't select these countries. They found us. That being said, we will soon be in every region of the world. Teach for America has, or Teach for All has an African hub, working now with about early stage entrepreneurs across about 10 African countries who are in the process of building support for and launching this model. And we're projecting being in about 43 countries by about 3 years from now, if the pipeline kind of progresses as it has. So to dive into just, the most salient lessons, I guess, that I've seen throughout this work in the US and around the world. The first of them is actually maybe the most recent, which has to do with the remarkable similarities in the nature of this problem from place to place. I remember getting on the plane to my first kind of Teach for All related trip way back, maybe 7 years ago, to go visit a very inspiring social entrepreneur, Shaheen Mistry, who was launching, or at the time was just exploring the possibility of launching Teach for India. And I remember what I was thinking. And what I was thinking was, India is a very different place than the United States, and I'm not sure. I mean, she was very insistent that I go visit, and it seemed like it was going to be really interesting, but I was just assuming that the differences in that context would completely overwhelm the similarities. And that week, I remember the big thing that I came back with, which was, wow, I cannot believe how similar it is. And that was really just the beginning of coming to understand that, all you have to do is start spending time in classrooms all over the world. It is particularly in the most, the highest need communities. Because what you realize in just sitting in those classrooms is that the circumstances for the most marginalized kids are, again, eerily similar from place to place. The kids are facing extraordinary challenges. They are going to schools that were never set up to meet their extra needs. Health needs, nutritional needs, they're starting far behind where, of course, their more privileged counterparts are. And they're going to schools that generally have fewer resources, let alone equal resources, and let alone the additional resources you would really need if you were going to take kids who face extra challenges and actually put them on a level playing field. So when you start to think about it, the solution for those kids, what they need in a teacher, is much more similar than it is different. What they need in their schools, the way that you'd have to think about affecting the system-wide changes that are necessary. So, as I progressed, I realized that far beyond spending time in classrooms and schools, once you started engaging with the governmental actors and the other folks who are addressing in one way or another, ensuring educational opportunity for kids, you just saw such incredible patterns from place to place. And that can be depressing if you start to think about it, because you realize we must be fighting the forces of gravity. Even the mindsets that perpetuate many of today's policies are so similar from place to place. But the good news is, once you realize that, you realize we can move a lot more quickly than we are if we start sharing solutions across country lines. So this is one of the reasons I'm so optimistic about our ability to actually make meaningful progress against this problem in our lifetimes. If we can create a global platform where we understand the solutions being pioneered all over the world, we will move much more quickly in actually solving this problem within any given number of countries. Another huge reason that I'm very optimistic has to do with the evidence we've seen at the level of classrooms, and in a minute we'll talk about at the level of whole schools and at the level of systems, that we can make a meaningful difference in taking kids whose background predicts one set of outcomes and putting them on a path to attaining completely different outcomes. It's not to say that we've seen this problem fully solved anywhere. It's just to say that once you've spent time in classrooms like these and in the schools and systems that I'll talk about in a bit, you realize how much we can do to tackle what used to be viewed as a really intransigent problem. Over here on your left, Chris Fairbairn is, I believe, taking his kids on some sort of outdoor action leadership development experience. But he's a math teacher in the UK. He was part of the Teach First program, which launched about 10 years ago there. And he works with kids who are in the bottom percentile in terms of poverty level, and has them at absolute levels of excellence in terms of their math performance. So he's taking kids who really were not on track to having access to university and has put them on a path to that. And in fact has gotten any number of kids into the most selective colleges in the UK. This is Anam Pala. She taught through Teach for Pakistan. And worked with 10th grade girls who entered her class about 4 years behind. She was seeing about 10 or 15% of them would meet the curricular standards in the subjects that she was teaching them. Not only that, but her girls were under such different circumstances, and some of them were in fact growing up in families where it would be possible for them to go on to some of the more really strong universities in Pakistan if they had the academic kind of credentials to do so. Others, just given the social conventions, there wasn't really a chance that they would leave their community. In fact, they were going to leave her classroom and get married the following year. So she set a goal for her kids, which was to say that all of them would be confident, reflective, goal-oriented, girls and women who would have the kind of personal ability to actually fulfill their aspirations. And she achieved just remarkable results, not only academically, where within even 1 year, and she did so much, as we could talk about, to actually attain these results, but she had moved the 10 or 15% of them who were meeting these standards to 60 or 75%, depending on the subject area. But she also put them on a very different path, each and every one of them. And they were very different paths from each other. Some of them did, in fact, end up going to some of Pakistan's most prestigious universities. Others, did get married and literally launched initiatives to educate other parents to send their girls to school. So just incredible transformational results in terms of, in her girls' minds, putting them on a path to having very different options in life. This is Ivy Martinez, a teacher who completed her 2 years in San Jose here in the US not that long ago. And I include her example because I just vividly remember my visit to her classroom. She was teaching 5th graders, and she'd started teaching them the year before. When they entered her classroom as 4th graders, they were already 2 to 3 years behind where they should be and were completely disengaged in school. And it was a striking visit for me because I had a 5th grader when I visited her room, and I watched as she engaged her kids in a level of critical thinking, reading this novel that I realized was far beyond what my own son and his classmates were able to do up here on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And I could go on, but she has instilled a level of ownership and investment on the part of her kids and their families to get to and through college that is quite stunning. So, I think these teachers and many teachers like them all over the world are showing us in the little microcosm of their classrooms that it is possible to take kids who face so many extra challenges, who are coming in way behind, and through meeting them with high expectations and providing extra supports, put them on a path to attaining levels on an absolute scale of excellence in education that does open up huge opportunities for them and in fact gives them a ticket out of poverty. So they show us in essence that this is a solvable problem. The issue is once you get to know these people, you realize how rare they are and how much of a stretch it is to think that we might be able to solve this problem through having millions and millions, all of our teachers who work with low-income kids, be the kind of superheroes they are, not just for 2 years, but for whole careers. It's seen, though, I've seen many of those people, the Ivies and Anams and Chris's of the world, go off and say, we need to do this on a bigger scale in a way that is replicable and sustainable and possible for talented, committed teachers, but not absolute superheroes, to actually put their kids on a different trajectory. The Kip Network is one of many networks, growing networks of high-performing charter schools that are showing us that we can take whole buildings full of kids and put them on a meaningfully different trajectory. This is a picture of a school in Atlanta that's part of a network there that takes kids who come into their building as fifth graders in the bottom third of performance based on the state standards, and by the time they leave as eighth graders, they're in the top third of performance, a truly just transformational school. There are growing numbers of these schools in the US. We could all debate around the edges, but I'm guessing 300 or 400 of them. And that's not nearly enough, but if you go back to even 15 years ago, 10 years ago, we could count on a single hand the number of schools that attain that kind of results. Now we can go up here and see regular public schools, not even charter schools, attaining incredibly significant, similarly significant transformational results. I was just in a school, regular public school in Washington Heights a couple weeks ago, that takes kids from the neighborhood who come in as sixth graders, far behind, 3 years behind where they should be, and has an almost, 100%, high school graduation rate with college acceptance letters, and then tracks them through college and has high levels of college persistence. So we now know these schools are showing us what's possible. It's been so encouraging to see schools like those popping up all around the world. Actually, these are two in the hands of some Teach for All program alums, Max Heimendorf in the UK, who started a school named King Solomon Academy. Still too early to know, but by all accounts, they are on an incredible trajectory to take some of the most challenged kids in economically disadvantaged kids in London and putting them on a track to access the most selective universities. His fifth graders are where seventh graders in the neighborhood school are at the moment. And I just recently walked around this incredible school called the 321 School that Gaurav Singh started in Mumbai. They've started with 3-year-olds who are literally, he has 3-year-olds even teaching the classes of 3-year-olds. I mean, this school is going to be so transformational in fluent English, despite the fact that they didn't speak a word of English less than a year ago. And he's planning to start 100 of these schools in the next 15 years. So these schools are showing us, again, they're giving us evidence that we can see truly transformational change for kids, that these schools are creating the kind of change that actually will change life outcomes. They show us that we don't need to live in the land of the incremental. And now the conversation, unlike where it was 20 years ago, before we had so much evidence on the level of whole schools that we actually could provide kids with a transformational education. Today the discussion isn't can it be done, it's how do we do it at scale? How do we get to the point where we have whole systems providing our most disadvantaged kids with the kind of education that can make a meaningful difference for them? And what's encouraging to me, and another reason for optimism, is just that while we have yet to be able to look at a whole community that's truly making it happen for each and every one of its low-income kids, the fact is we can see truly meaningful progress. This is a study, maybe you've seen it, it was hugely circulated, but that McKinsey did, looking at 20 school systems around the world, some in the US, but all around the world, that have made significant progress. And it sort of looked at what can we learn and found real patterns, which means we can learn from, again, what's happening in one system and transfer those learnings. One thing I'll say on this, I've been so inspired to see the progress we've made in New Orleans, which for many years, I mean, Teach for America started placing teachers in New Orleans, more than 20 years ago. And we, knew from firsthand experience just how challenged that system was. I mean, this is a place where you would just routinely see eighth graders performing on a second grade level, and we didn't see a lot of progress for many, many years. But since Hurricane Katrina, we've seen dramatic progress. We've more than doubled the percentage of kids in the school system in New Orleans who are meeting the state standards. And as of Friday, I just saw the latest stats, which show that The high school graduation rate in New Orleans has moved from 54%, which is pretty much on par with where our high school graduation rates are in our hardest pressed urban areas, to 78%, which is better than the national average. Not only that, but the percentage of kids who are deemed college ready based on Louisiana's assessment at the same time moved from 25% to 40%. So we're graduating many more kids, and we're preparing them much better for the rigors of college. There's a lot more to be done, to say the very least, in New Orleans. But seeing that kind of progress is, really gives us reason to believe that if we can make this happen in New Orleans. I know now it seems, well, they had a hurricane, but honestly, if we go back to 6 years ago, there was not a place where we had lower expectations for being able to recover from that hurricane and actually pull that off. So I think the fact that they could do what they did just really should give us all huge hope and optimism that we can make a big progress in many other contexts. Next and last, kind of most salient learning has to do with kind of what we see at work wherever we see the kind of transformational progress that we've now realized is possible, from looking at classrooms at the level of schools, at the level of whole systems. And the reality is there is no one thing. I mean, we all wish there was, and our policymakers really wish there was. We let ourselves kind of lurch from one silver bullet solution to the next. If you look at our education policy in this country, and it's true all around the world, I've discovered, it's just every year you could name the year. Like, this is the year of give every kid a computer, give every parent a voucher, make every school a charter. If you go way back here, even in my tenure in this effort, it's like, this is the year of the project-based curriculum. If only we can move everyone to a project-based curriculum, we will be done. It turns out, and once you really get into this, you just realize there's no one thing. This is about doing everything right. And that means that at the center of the solution is going to be people and essentially leadership. When you think about the very center of this picture, teacher leadership, when you really get into it and figure out what is it that Anam and Chris and Ivy, those teachers I was talking about earlier, what is it that's differentiating them? Honestly, they're doing what great leaders do. They are going into a situation a lot of people have given up on and saying, you know what, here's the vision. Here's what we're going to do. And they're getting their kids on a mission to get there. And then they're being very purposeful and completely relentless. If you really get into what did Ivy do with her kids, or what did Anam do, that describes it as well as anything. Those are the patterns that most emerge. When you spend time visiting schools like King Solomon Academy in the UK, or the Kip schools, or the Washington Heights School I talked about, or the school in Mumbai, always, 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 without any exception, I've had the incredible privilege of walking around at least 100 of these schools, always there is a school leader who is on an absolute personal mission to ensure that all the kids in that building gain the academic skills and the character strengths necessary to get, on a trajectory to have access to the full range of professional options. And always there are people with the leadership skills necessary to build a team and a culture and to basically make it happen irrespective of the obstacles. There's just no way to do it without that kind of leader. And when you get into it and you ask yourself, what is it that's different in the school systems that are making the fastest progress? What happened in New Orleans as one example? Ultimately, you realize, again, it's about a constellation of leaders, not just the folks in education, but without them, there's no hope. But people working from within the system, in the political system, in the civic space, who are really united in an understanding that we don't need to live in the land of the incremental, we can't afford to, that we can have truly transformational change for kids, and who have spent a lot of time in these classrooms and schools and therefore have a very grounded understanding of how to solve the problem. And as a result, we'll work together for bold change and for the kind of changes that really make sense. We need a lot of leadership coming from all sorts of directions. As you can see, this is the attempt of this, is to show that as we've progressed, and I could say a lot more about this and won't because I want to get to our discussion, but initially we thought ultimately this was about capacity inside the system. But then you realize, gosh, the enabler to have political leaders who actually get this And then you realize that that's not enough either. Like, we need the folks in the community who represent the community and the parents and the kids we're working with to be at the table, really informing and advocating for the kind of changes we need. And ultimately you realize we basically need every piece of this puzzle, because it is a big systemic issue. And so the solutions are going to be really systemic in nature as well. The encouraging thing is to see that, we've seen, I think, here in the US that this model has a magnetic power. I mean, 57,000 people applying to Teach for America this year. But we've also seen that that's the case just all over the world. Teach for India, these are recruitment posters from various countries around the world, but Teach for India just closed its 5th recruitment season with 11,000 applications. Teach for Colombia, its 2nd with 2,100 for something like 70 spots. Teach for Nepal just launched its 33 fellows are starting this week, actually today, in remote villages in Nepal, selected out of 500 applicants. So that is one other reason for optimism, just the realization that all over the world we're seeing some of the top talent channeling their energy against a problem that is so pressing and so similar from place to place. We've also really seen that diverse cultures do inspire different ways of thinking and innovation. And it's all of that together that leads us to feel like we're just at the front end of something which has the potential to become just a thriving global movement. You really envision, it's such a universal, again, like this idea of we should of course be channeling top talent against the most fundamental of all issues, education. And you can just imagine that happening in countries all over the world, with diverse cultures inspiring different ways of thinking as part of a global network where people are informing each other. And that's what gives us the idea that one day this will be a thriving global movement. This is a picture, of course, of Malala, who put her life on the line to demand access to an education in Pakistan. I think her call helped us all understand the global nature of this issue of educational inequity. So many other social issues are viewed as global in nature, but I think for some reason we've often seen education as just a local issue. Yet when you start thinking about it in the same way as is the case for, say, the environment, you realize the solutions are shareable, and at least as importantly, our fate is shared. I mean, you envision, a world of declining educational levels, growing educational disparities, and that is not a good world. Not for our economic prosperity, not for our public health and safety, but you envision a world of shrinking disparities and growing educational opportunity, and our global welfare is, so much improved. So this is what gives us just a sense of urgency and responsibility every day around this work. And I hope that this is a cause that will, in fact, magnetize some of you, and that you will consider what role you can play in addressing this issue, either here at home or, in fact, around the world. So thank you very much.
We now have about 20 minutes or so for Q&A. There's a mic here and a mic here, and so anybody with questions, please line up and get to your question as soon as you can, so as many people can participate. You want to start with me?
Hey, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a treat. I'm in the Grad School of Business and Public Policy, this dual degree program. Hello. I think in this field of so-called social entrepreneurship, it's really easy to idealize the champions and successes, and we rarely hear about all the failures and mistakes. So I wanted to ask a lessons learned question. Can you talk about a time as you've scaled and grown this thing that everything has gone wrong, or where you wish you had done things differently, and what you've learned in that process?
Well, your question is funny, because every day, how many people do I meet who say, you must feel so good about what you do? And I always think, Sort of. But pretty much all I think every day is, how much is not going right and, how much more there is to do. So I honestly see this, and it probably couldn't be any other way. I mean, we're working to address a problem that has been just intransigent for years and years. But I feel like we are on a steep and ever growing learning curve around how to do this well. And it starts with the programmatic piece. I mean, we could talk about the management challenges and the political challenges and the financial challenges, each of which are quite extreme in terms of figuring out how do we actually scale something? How do we sustain it over time? How do we, navigate, the very significant politics involved in changing any big entrenched status quo? But probably the hardest and toughest, challenges come as you think about actually making a difference as it relates to the very core of our mission. How do we recruit and select folks who are actually ready for this? Not just to survive with their kids in their first year of teaching, but to actually help put their kids on a different trajectory. How do we provide them with the training and support that enables them to accomplish that and to leave more committed to change and not more disillusioned? And then how do we, catalyze their ongoing involvement and in fact speed up their ongoing leadership so that we have a chance in our lifetime, not in someone else's future, very distant lifetime, to actually make a meaningful difference at a significant scale. So it's those challenges. There's never an end. The minute you figure out one thing, it's only the beginning of realizing the next set of challenges. So I think that's kind of the real nature of the work behind the scenes.
Okay. Hi, Ms. Kopp. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. So, okay, sure. So my question is, since Teach for All is a multinational organization now, and even within one country, there's certainly many different situations in different rural areas. For example, in China, in certain rural area, there may not be enough children in a certain area to actually establish a school or send many teachers there. So my question is, how do you actually identify the locations to send the teachers and building a site for the organization?
Mm-hmm. Well, I should first of all just make clear, so each of these Teach for All programs are independent social enterprises themselves. So the team in, say, Teach for China has, and obviously they're just beginning and they're addressing a massive challenge. So initially they looked for a place where they could build strong governmental partnership, where they knew that the needs were significant and they thought that they could, build a foundation that would then set them up to be able to, ultimately grow their impact to a really meaningful scale despite the dimensions of China. So they've started off in 2 provinces. They're off to a great start, but it's really early days. They have tremendous public sector support, which is so crucial in China. But of course, there are many unmet needs. Many, and that's their challenge, is to think about how do we scale in order to meet them.
Okay, cool. So it is independent organization in each country, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
So I think your last slide, for me, did a very good job of explaining some of the profound growth that can happen from a program like Teach for America or the Teach for All programs. But you also talk about trying to scale the change that can happen, which is incredibly important, obviously. But one thing that I think happens is that with the scaling and trying to figure out how we're making progress, there becomes an emphasis on standardized testing. And I'm wondering if you see your organization as contributing to a change in the culture, not only in excellence and progress and these great ideas, but also a problem, which I think is teaching to the test and emphasizing that over real education.
Mm-hmm. Again, once you solve one problem, you realize it's created other problems. I mean, I think when I go back to 20 years ago, we weren't measuring anything and we were completely deluding ourselves. I mean, truly. I would go to conferences where people would say, do we really think that the kids in low-income communities aren't achieving their potential academically? now at least we know, yeah, we really think so. Like, we can tell you for sure. The problem, as you say, is, who would have thought at the time it seemed good, like let's actually measure something and commit ourselves to changing it in measurable terms. Like in any other sector, when you commit to measurable progress, you're much more likely to see it than when you let everything sort of exist more, in a fluffier way. But as we've seen, it can really generate, a low levelness about this that doesn't really make any difference in the lives of kids. So I think we need both. I mean, I think that it's interesting to see, and we'll see how it all plays out. But first of all, not measuring isn't a solution for anyone, in my view. We've been down that path before, and it doesn't get us where we need to go. Any good teacher finds a way of really understanding where their kids are so that they can meet their needs and actually move them ahead. So the trick is not in whether or not we should measure, it's how do we develop really good measures. And I hope we're on a path to a better world, at least in this country and hopefully in other countries as well, where we actually have rigorous, good, internationally benchmarked standards. Now we need rigorous, really good assessments so that so if we're teaching to the test, we're actually moving kids where they need to be. So I think it's a complicated question, but agree with your assessment that where we are right now, thanks to all the standardized testing, isn't where we want to be.
Hi. So is this okay? Okay. Just kind of a follow-up question off of that. So then I'm wondering, how do you cope with the, not cope, but how do you plan to teach the educators who go in and deal with these standardizations and, speed bumps that are inevitable in the program?
Well, each of these Teach for All programs, first of all, has to give lots of deep thought to this question. So I'll just focus on the Teach for America efforts now. I mean, each of our teachers sets out to figure out, okay, what is my vision? Hopefully, ultimately, I mean, we talk a lot about these vision setting exercises because in the end, it needs to be not our vision, but the vision of the community allies with whom we're working. But what are we working toward? When Ivy sat back, she wasn't thinking, let me get all my kids to do well on the standardized test in California. She was thinking, I'm going to put my kids on a path to having the same opportunities that I had. And she worked backwards from there. But one thing she knew was my fourth graders not being able to write in a way where you put even spaces between words is probably not going to do it. Like, she taught to a level of academic rigor that she thought would actually get them on that path. But as an example, one day she walked into her room and sat down at her desk and handed out worksheets and did almost nothing for a day. And at the end of the day got up and said, so what do you think of today? And her kids were like, it was so strange. I mean, it feels like someone said, I feel like I've been in a class like this before. She's like, you know what? You might find yourself in a class like this again. So let's brainstorm. What are you going to do when that happens? I tell that story because this is a teacher who is not just driven to get her kids to standardized tests. She is driven to truly ensure that she's done everything she possibly can in the 2 years she had with her kids that will put them on a different trajectory. And that's really what we're all aiming for in our teachers.
Hi. So first, let me thank you for speaking. I think that it's a real pleasure to have someone from you come to speak for Reynolds, especially because we get to ask you questions like this and hear the answers directly. Yeah. Mine is, what's your opinion really about alternative methods of education, such as outdoor education, service-based education? I know that in this room, I'm almost positive we have folks from hip-hop-based education, so I'll just leave it at that.
I think it has tremendous potential. I think about my own kids even, and you think about the range of things that it takes to engage kids. I don't know how we could possibly argue against, many of the examples even that you mentioned. I think we need to be sure, I guess there's a hierarchy of needs in some contexts. And, when you go into, a high school in Newark that I can remember visiting at some point, and you realize, okay, I'm in the room of a classroom of 10th graders who are not reading on a 5th grade level. What do I need to do right now? And, I think it can be tempting to, we need to think about all the things we need to do. And the fact is that, I just spent some time with some folks in Baltimore at who have a very inspiring initiative called The Intersection, to engage high school kids who, in fact, their academic skills might, in fact, look somewhat like that, but in actually developing a vision for their community and going out and advocating for it. This group of kids has contributed massively to passing the Maryland DREAM Act. They almost single-handedly caused to be passed this bottle tax, which generated millions of dollars for the schools. Incredible. And you realize in talking with the kids that that experience gave them a whole different vision for their future and reason that education was important. They've made incredible academic gains. And I swear many of them are going to end up probably being Teach for America alums and core members and many other change agents around the world. So that's an example of it being done so well in ways that, in the hands of their teachers, really reinforced their kind of academic abilities as well. So I just think we need to stay so rooted in what's really going to make a difference for kids. And I think strong academics is definitely a piece of that, but it's definitely not the whole piece.
Hi, I'm Justin Rosen-Smolin, and I'm a graduate of Wagner, and work for an organization called Present Tense, which helps launch social startups, and we work directly with entrepreneurs in giving them the training that they need to do so. We spend a lot of time thinking about the types of tools and frameworks they need to really actualize their visions, and I would like to hear on a more, tactical level, the kinds of training and support you provide to your teachers in the core so that when they walk into the classroom, they can be as effective as they can be.
Again, this is such a journey. We've learned a ton, and every time we've gone down one path, we spent many years actually at Teach for America, and I'll use this to illustrate the beauty of a global network as well, going down the path of intense skill and knowledge building. We developed a rubric that we call the Teaching as Leadership rubric. It was based on what we've seen to differentiate the Ivies of the world, and it's very, very specific. We did lots and lots of data gathering, and we basically isolated what are the pieces of this framework that the most successful of our teachers are really good at. We started spending all of our time working on developing those skills and knowledge. Things like, how do you assess your kids? How do you understand where your kids are at the beginning of the year? How do you develop a clear plan for them? How do you then, develop lesson plans and curricular plans that will take them towards those in a very efficient way? How do you build a positive culture in your room that will get your kids invested in working in this way, et cetera? And actually, we watched the folks at Teach for India and Ensenya Peru take all that, and in their contexts and cultures and given their experience, say, let's spend 70% of our time on that, or maybe 60% even, and spend 30 or 40% on mindset building. Let's immerse our folks in the community and get them absolutely on fire to put their kids on a different trajectory. And we saw that it was working. So we're bringing a lot of that back. I just think I wish it could be really simple. But it turns out it's a real puzzle to develop teachers with the mindsets and the skills and the knowledge necessary to provide the kind of transformational education that we're actually aiming for. And anything short of that just doesn't really make a meaningful difference in the lives of kids. So we got to keep our eyes on that bar, and I think that's what makes it so challenging.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Okay. Thank you not only for the talk, but for doing this work. Because I think you have to be a challenge transformer almost every day when you're trying to do this. And I work in a similar sector, as Gabe knows. I teach most of the classes in the minor for social entrepreneurship here, an undergrad, and a big supporter of Reynolds and Gabe and what they're doing here, and that you would come. I'm curious about a build on the question that the gentleman just asked. I teach here. I've changed a lot over time. I started very traditional in a number of ways, and now I'm kind of a combo badass as well as very experiential. And we're succeeding. You have two of your new people coming into the sector. This is Kate Levy right here, one of our top talents. She's going to do early childhood education, TFA, San Francisco. This is Olivia Bacchus, and she's going to do New Orleans early
Great.
childhood education. So my question to you is this: how do educators like me create more of them? And it's a little
Yeah.
different than what you just said about
Right.
teaching them how to teach the kids. How do we teach
Yeah.
them to give you more, all of you, more of this critical work?
I love that question. I'll tell you what we look for. Every year we do more studies and we try to understand what is it that differentiates the folks who are truly transformational teachers, who become transformational alums, and what could we have seen at the front end. And I don't want to be too generic about it, but the big category that we've realized is we're looking for real leaders, meaning people who, first of all, maybe first and foremost, for reasons that you can understand if you really stop and think about it, we're looking for people who will take on big challenges and persevere in the face of them. 3 weeks into this work, everyone hits a wall with very few exceptions. The difference is that some people look at themselves and say, what am I going to do to fix this? And some people just decide, who else am I going to blame? The kids, the families, the system. And if you start talking with people straight out of college and you start diving into their past, what did they do? I think that is one of many things that if we could all, of course, help our young people internalize the mindsets that we really all need there, it would be huge. It would be huge. It would probably dramatically increase our selection rate. But there are other things that are hugely important as well. The ability to influence and motivate others in a sophisticated way, problem-solving ability. And, you've got to truly want to pursue this particular mission relentlessly and thoughtfully. And I think having real exposure to the issues that we're addressing, having worked with kids and in low-income communities, actually it's still not really a differentiator for the folks who get in, but more experience and then reflection on leadership, taking on big challenges in that context will help us become all the more, able to see at the front end what we really need to see, to ensure success in the long run.
So please join me in thanking Wendy for a really inspiring and really informative talk.
Thank you.
So much for